So we're going to be doing a 3-week series on authority. Today is the topic, the title is What is Authority? A series on why authority exists and how it works for our good. So this is a massive topic, and there's a lot that could be said on it, and so we're not going to say everything. But my hope for us as we go through this is to get a better understanding about what we should believe in terms of authority, what authority is, what's it for, how we understand that in relationship to Scripture, what Scripture teaches us about authority and also submission to authority, and also that it would impact each one of you all to understand and see areas where you've fallen short in the use of that authority. Because if we're honest with ourselves as we go through this over the next 3 weeks, we're going to recognize that we fall woefully short of God's calling for us and on us, either in submitting and also exercising authority. So I'm going to start off with a kind of a teaser here, which is by the Wilhelm Kettel, the Chief of Staff of the German High Command. He said, "We all believe so much in him, Hitler, and we stand to take all the blame and the shame. He gave us the orders. He kept saying that it was all his responsibility." So what we're going to be talking about over the next couple of weeks is many different things that relate to authority. And today we're going to be talking about some of the building blocks to understanding what authority is. In order to get at it, to understand properly, there's more that needs to be thought about than just, let's look in the Bible where it says authority, and then therefore we have an answer about what authority is. And the reason for this is because if we think about any other concept, for example, Jesus is God. Who says Jesus is God that is not a Christian? Who says Jesus is God? Scripture. Yeah, Scripture. But who else says Jesus is God, but they're heretics? Who? You know, the Mormons, Arians, Unitarians. Just because we can go into Scripture and say, okay, here it says the Word was with God, the Word was God, that in itself is not a sufficient account of what that means. Because an Arian, someone who denies the deity of God, Christ, can say Jesus is God. But we have to be clear about what are they saying when they say that? What does that actually mean? And so that requires us to do some philosophical and theological thinking. We need to put on our thinking caps in order to dig down and to understand what is it we believe about, in this case, authority. So another priority that I want to get across over the next couple of weeks is that what Scripture says about authority and submission is not arbitrary, which is to say that it's not that it could have been otherwise. So here's some examples of just some texts that talk about authority. I don't know if you can see that all right. In Titus 3:1, it says, "Remind them to be submissive to rulers and authorities, to be obedient, to be ready for every good work." Are we able to move this forward a bit? Or... okay. For every good work. In Acts it says, "But Peter and the apostles answered, we must obey God rather than men." In Hebrews 13 it says, "Obey your leaders and submit to them, for they are keeping watch over your souls as those who will have to give an account." 1 Corinthians 11 says, "But I want you to understand that the head of every man is Christ, the head of a wife is her husband, and the head of Christ is God." In Matthew 7 it says, "For he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as the scribes." And lastly, the one that we even heard wonderfully yesterday is that wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church and is himself its Savior. So there's a whole ton of concepts being used, different ideas of authority, but what are we really talking about? So I'm going to put it to you guys, and let's ask this question here. What kind of authorities are we talking about? What kind of authorities are there that you can think of around us that you see? Chris, I don't know if you probably don't need a mic. We can just shout it out. Give me some examples of authority.
Parents over children.
Parents over children, okay.
Government.
Government, Okay. Yeah, secular, like the secular government. Any others?
God.
Pardon?
God.
God. Good one, Ilya. Any others?
Bosses over employees.
Bosses over employees.
Familial.
Cha-ching. Familial authority. Yes. Any others? Yeah. Teachers over students. Yes. Right? In some sense, I'm here. Right? Am I have authority? In what sense do I have authority? In what sense am I under what sense am I under response? I have responsibility before God because I'm teaching you something. Right? In what sense are you responsible? Right? As being under my authority. How much are you to believe and when should you stop? Any others? Yes. Okay. So there's a whole bunch of different kinds of instances or spheres of authority around us. We might even say as well another, which we'll get to momentarily, which is authority over ourselves. And maybe that's not a familiar concept, but we'll talk about that and why that's an important one to add to the list. So here's a question for you. What is authority for?
Guidance.
Okay, guidance.
Order.
Order, okay. Protection, security. Okay, is there something that can kind of unify all of these?
Leadership.
Leadership, okay. Well, leaders have authority, but what do leaders do? For what? What is the purpose? To glorify God? Well, but is your boss serving? In this case? Well, we're talking about in general. Yeah. I mean, ultimately, yes. We want to say yes. But most many people, when they're exercising authority, they aren't thinking about that. What did you say, Caleb? To steward. Okay.
Perhaps as a goal or mission.
Okay, yeah. So we've heard some of that. So what would be like a goal of authority?
Like God. A civil magistrate wants to keep society in shape.
En forme.
Would you say defining the boundaries of power?
No, I would say that that's maybe what authority might do, but that's not what authority is for.
Unity.
Well, that would be an example of having authority, but what is taking dominion for? Well, that's a good one, but the thing is that that's so specific to political governments. What about in the home? Yeah.
Authority is for imaging God.
Okay. I would say that is definitely what imaging authority does. That's an effective imaging authority, but the question is, what is the purpose of authority? Because there's other aspects of the human person that images God. So there has to be a way to distinguish those. Yeah, Abby? Yes. So what we're getting at, I'm going to give you the yes, but the question is that what is it ultimately for? We're talking about teleology, which is just a fancy word for saying the telos, the end, the goal. And whenever we're talking about authority, what we're really talking about is, this is a very basic, we're going to say more about this, but authority is the ability to direct others to the good or to some good. And the question is that what is that good? Good authority directs others to some good. Now the questions that we're going to be wrestling with is, how do we direct? What does it mean to direct others or guide others? We could use the word guide, or rule others to the good, or we can even use the word steward. So the question is to become, in depending on the sphere, is going to impact what good we're referring to, and also with regards to the subjects who we're dealing with, is going to impact the way that we direct. So we'll look at that a little bit more now. So if authority has something to do with directing others, then we need to think about the different ways that we are moved. Whoa, what are we talking about here? Moved. I'm talking about motion. I'm talking about agency. I'm talking about activity. If we don't understand how people are moved, we won't exercise well. We won't know how to direct them towards the good. And I'm speaking very generically because every single person in this room has authority. Every single person in this room, in some sense, has authority. It's not just the men. It's not just the elders, the deacons. Everybody here has somebody or maybe yourself. Maybe we could just limit to yourself. But you have siblings, you have nieces, nephews. Everybody here has someone that they're exercising authority or they have an opportunity to exercise authority over. So what does it mean to be moved? That word there. Well, there's going to be some philosophical terminology that we're going to have to use in order to be clear on this concept, authority. So if you go into the Greek, if you were to go into your New Testament and you search the word exousia, and here's the Greek for it, you're going to get a whole bunch. It comes up in the New Testament hundreds of times, all over the Gospels, everywhere. And we get the English word authority, but we also get other words. You can translate it as things like freedom or liberty or right or even sometimes choice. And that's because in the Greek, there's other concepts that are related to exousia. So if you were to go into the ancient philosophical discussions over authority, roughly around the same time that the gospel was written and slightly after, you would see this term to autexousion. Here's the Greek for it. And it means effectively self-determination. And you can actually see here the same word, exousia and exousion. Exousia, exousion. So authority is something to do, there's also this concept of self-determination that people were using. So what does this have to do with authority and why were ancient thinkers, and not just ancient pagan thinkers, but also ancient Christian thinkers, and not just ancient Christian thinkers, but also the medievals and even the reformers, using these concepts of self-determination and authority? What do they have to do together? Well, I'm going to try and show you over the next couple of weeks that these things are highly related. That in order to understand self-determination rightly, in order to understand authority well, we need to understand them together. So what we'll do is we'll go through and we'll think a little bit about motion, because we're talking about directing others, right? I can tell you to stand up and move, or I can pick you up and move you, right? So we need to think a little bit about how things are moved. So there are inanimate substances and stones. So those things undergo motion. We're going to do a kind of a taxonomy of reality, okay? We're going to break reality down into the way different things are moved, just so we can be very clear. So inanimate objects, right? If you were to get a stone and I were to pick it up and move it, that stone, the principle of its movement is nothing other than me. I'm the one moving the stone, right? Josh can move the stone. Everyone can move the stone. The stone doesn't move itself. The principle of its motion, its movement, its change, is not in the stone. Is that very clear? Is that too hard to grasp? No? Or otherwise you might be stoned. It's pretty I didn't write that down. That was on the fly. Just to say. Just so it's like stone, say stone there. Animate substances, so these are things that have, in some sense, souls. They have the principle of life. That's what we're talking about when we talk about souls. The tradition, the Christian tradition, drawing also on the philosophical tradition, has broken this down into three different categories. There are nutritive souls, locomotive souls, and rational souls. Okay? What am I talking about? Believe it or not, for the majority of the Christian tradition, prior to the Enlightenment, people believed that plants had souls. What in the world? Cats, dolphins, mice have souls. So what are we talking about? What is a soul? Well, a soul is a principle of motion. It's a principle of life. So unlike a stone is, there's nothing that will move it towards anything. It is static. Whereas a plant actually has a principle of its motion. Let me back up into the next slide here. The fundamental, all of reality, the primary things in reality are substances. So the modern person, the atheist, will say that the primary units of reality are atoms, or the most. Go down even farther. Ilya, you study physics. What? Quarks. Quarks, protons. Those are like the most fundamental, and even beyond that, there's probably even something lower that they'd say. These are the fundamental primary building blocks of reality. They're the primary units. Traditionally, prior to the Enlightenment, substances were the primary units of reality. A being whose essence naturally requires it to exist in itself. An ultimate distinct subject of being. So what am I talking about? Is my hand a substance? No. Why? Because it doesn't have its essence. It doesn't have its essence in itself. It is related to the human being, to me, my hand. It doesn't have its own unique, distinct telos and fundamental unity that guides it towards something. The fundamental building block of reality for me, it's this is the human person, and each substance is directed towards a final cause, a purpose towards which it tends, to which it moves. So as a typical example again, right? A seed has the directionality of going into a tree. You can think about all kinds of different examples, but take an infant in the womb, right? They're often called the seeds. Like they're growing, and they're naturally tending towards an end. And all things naturally move towards their own perfection. That's a fundamental metaphysical, this is some metaphysical language here, movement of all things naturally, unless they are inhibited from moving towards that end, right? So if you pour acid on the plant, is the plant going to be able to grow towards its end? No, it doesn't. It dies, right? If you pour acid on me, right? Well, that's going to affect me. It's going to corrupt me. I'm not going to move forward and flourish as God has designed me to. The next thing we talk about is locomotive souls. And the reason why we call them locomotive souls is because unlike plants don't move of their own accord. They merely draw in nutrients. And that's why we call them plants are alive. So they draw in nutrients. And whereas animals actually move. They actually not only draw nutrients, but they also move themselves towards certain objects, right? Since they are trying to perfect themselves, achieving their telos. To be a really good dog is to try to achieve dogginess, or try to be a really good cat is achieve felineness, or whatever they're called. So all these creatures are moving towards naturally their telos, unless prohibited. And then the third one, which we'll talk about in a moment, is rational souls, humans. And just so you don't think I'm absolutely crazy, the word animate, it comes actually from the Latin word which means anima, which is like the same word for soul in Latin. So it's not just me speaking this, like it's actually even in our language, to be animated, right? It's to be moving, right? To be animated. That's what it means to be ensouled. So what we're not talking about is that they have a soul like you and I, where it's like a rational soul. But all we're saying is that every substance around you is composed of form and body. Even a fish has the form of a fish and the body. And that's a fundamental building block of reality, that substance. So inanimate substance, as we've said, they are entirely passive. And you might be thinking, what does this have to do with authority? We're going to get there. Hold on. You need to grasp all of these little bits as we move along in order to distinguish. So, but a locomotive soul, the principle of movement is, in one sense, internal, and in another sense, external. So, for example, if you take a cat and that cat sees catnip, what's the principle of of movement for the cat? Pardon? Go towards the catnip. But what's the principle, the cause of the cat's movement? But why? Yeah, that's the effect, but of touching the catnip. But what's the cause, the principle of the movement towards the catnip? Desire. So that would be like a more rational concept, but yes, there is desire in a sense in animals where they perceive, so there's the word perception and sensation, so they perceive that which is and we can use this word analogically, good, they can perceive it, and so they desire it, and so they're moved towards it. And the thing that we need to know is that they are moving towards it according to their nature, towards those things that are desirable. But if you were to put catnip there, could the cat just sit there and think, I don't know, but and I'm not gonna touch it today. Could a cat do that? Okay, Ilya.
No, but seriously, on 3 cats, all 3 hate catnip and go away from it.
Now there are other philosophical things that could be distinguished about that, but in the norm, you could train a cat to hate catnip, and I'll give you a good example of how. You put the catnip there, and the cat walks towards it, and as soon as it crosses a line, it gets zapped by electricity, right? You do it over and over and over again, and then all of a sudden they start associating that with pain. So now they're no longer going to be moved towards it. But what they're fundamentally being moved towards, the thing is according to their nature, and like when it comes to food or to flee danger, things like that, their nature and and also they're acting on pleasure and pain. Not always pleasure, but often acting on fear of pain. So if you're kicking a cat, then they're going to run away from you. It's not really that philosophical. So, if authority is directing another towards the good, how does one exercise authority over animals? So to give you a verse, let them have dominion over the fish in the sea, talking about Adam and Eve, or man, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the wild animals of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. How do you exercise authority, exercise dominion? If you go into the Greek of the Old Testament, it's exusitatis or something. I can't remember, but it's the same word. Yeah.
You direct them towards good.
But how?
By preventing them towards the bad.
Okay, but how do you train them? How do you prevent them?
I guess, for lack of better words, governing it according to their wants.
Okay, here's the question for you. Wait. There's a hungry cat. This cat is starving. Okay. There's some food over here. Now this cat has been wounded by this food in the past. Now, this is like a traumatized cat. So this is the only food in the whole world, is this food. Let's call it. All you have is tuna. That's it. There's no other tuna in the whole world. This is the only. You're on a desert island. What are you going to do to get this cat to eat this tuna? Yeah, but force feed it?
Or you could train it to think of the tuna as no longer bad, but is now good, so that it could eat
But can cats think?
the tuna. No, but you can behaviorally modify it.
How?
You associate their brain with that, no longer with the tuna being bad, with it being good.
But how do you do that?
There are other ways.
It didn't make you all of a sudden a cat specialist. Yeah?
You could nurture it, give it pets, and then it'll associate with getting pets with food or something.
Yeah.
You could reward it after it eats the food.
Yeah, you could do different things to try to move it along. Yeah.
Positive and negative reinforcement.
Yeah. So now I don't want to get in trouble by some crazy animal human rights, they believe they're the same thing practically. But fundamentally, we don't persuade animals with reason. Animals must be broken, to use that language. We use force. We use compulsion. And so you can do that to stop an animal from doing something bad, or like with a horse being broken in, we use that language. You're not reasoning them. You're literally breaking them in terms of breaking their will, to use that analogously. And you're doing that through the use of force, the use of compulsion, and also through things like pleasure and pain. So that's what we're really talking about, pleasure and pain. So you can train a dog to do something by giving them a treat. You're not giving them a logical reason why they should eat or do this thing or stand beside you. You're giving them a treat. And every time they do the right thing, they get a treat. And so they're happy. And then eventually they learn to stand beside you. Now, I'm not a dog trainer, so I don't know if that's actually the way professional dog trainers do it. But they aren't sitting down and talking to the dog. I know that. So fundamentally, pleasure and pain, and this is because when it comes down to it, animals don't like pain. So the question then becomes for you and I, and this is going to relate to authority when it comes to moving others and even moving ourselves. How are we moved? Or how do we move? Muscles. Okay, Caleb. How are we? How are we moved? Yeah. Okay, but well, cats have brains. Yes, Abby. Sorry, Sephi. Yeah, but yeah. So that's necessary, but is it sufficient? Yes, Abby. The will. Okay. Yeah, I think you're on the right track. There you go. Yep.
Notice that big toe because it keeps us balanced.
Yeah, that is definitely necessary to make us walk. But when we're thinking about yeah.
For this question, you mean like what makes us move different from animals? I mean, animals move.
Yes.
They move kind of within themselves, even if we're not
Mm-hmm.
making them move.
Yeah.
They'll still go about it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, like it is our brain. I guess you want us to say.
Well, not I guess. Yeah. So the Ray. Well, yeah, actually, we are moved on account of pleasure and pain. So this is where, when we go back to this other slide here, we are not entirely just disembodied reason, just kind of intellects just floating out there. We're embodied. We have bodies. So we need nutrients. We move like other animals. We experience pleasure and pain. We suffer. We are acted upon. We are pushed. We are moved. And we also, do we have agency? That's the real question I'm getting at. Do we have agency? So you can put it like this. What fundamentally depends upon us? Right now, what depends upon you, Josh?
What depends upon me?
Yes.
In moving, in motion, in all that up. Brain hurts, heart, rationale. Thinking will.
Here. Come over here, Josh. Stand over here. Okay, so I want you to crouch down. Okay. Now come closer. Now, we're asking the question, what depends on Josh Houston? Okay. So, that's actually not, that's my water. Do you have water? No. Okay, go someone else. Sorry. Okay, you have water? Yes. Okay, come here. Okay, put the water cup down there. Okay. Now crouch down. It's more interesting. Now, you would like some water, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you're going to get that water? Go get that water.
Sure.
No, you're not.
Oh, well. All right.
See? No. See. See, fundamentally, he wanted that water.
Yes.
That was his intention to do it, but I actually stopped him. Right? And he could try to go for it, but I'm stronger than him, so I could stop him. Here you go. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay.
How we move?
Pardon?
Act 17. Can we live and move and have our being?
Okay. Yeah, fundamentally, God is the cause of all things. He's the ultimate mover, prime mover. So when it comes down to thinking how we're moved, what depends on us, we're acted upon. He, in a technical sense, suffered. He was passive in that I actually stopped him. I forced his hand away. So it was, you could say it was involuntary. He didn't will, he willed to that, and he ultimately couldn't achieve that. So if that's the case, if things that are external to us are fundamentally, ultimately, not absolutely in our control, not within the sphere of our influence, the sphere, you might even say, of our authority, our ultimate authority. We can do this. It is under my authority to achieve this, to do that. If things external are not, then where does that leave us? Because even the cat, right, fundamentally is embodied, is acted upon, and cannot guarantee that it's going to get that catnip, because coyote might come along and take it away. So where do we find what depends upon us? Scripture. Okay.
We're acting upon.
Yeah, we're to fundamentally what depends on us in terms of our ability to be the cause of our own actions, or are we not? That's the way some people answer this question, because fundamentally some people say we're entirely bodies, so that means we're entirely passive. All of reality is fundamentally made up of these quirks, atoms bumping into each other. And so we don't fundamentally have control over anything. And control, in fact, is an illusion. So then where do we find, you might say, self-determination or authority?
Our hearts, or our will, which is the extension of our hearts.
So, yeah. So what you're saying, except for the heart part, because hearts is metaphorical language that Scripture uses to speak of a faculty of the soul. But even when we think about our own bodies, right? So can you, for example, control your own gallbladder? No, that doesn't depend upon you, right? There are things that are in us that we actually don't have control over. The liver, you don't control your liver. Your heart beating. Now, Ilya may say that some crazy person somewhere in the world have done it. Okay. Of course. But, in terms of these parts of the body, we don't have fundamentally control over them. We don't have authority over them. And so we can't guarantee that what we do will come about. So when we think about what is in our control, how we are fundamentally the principle of our own motion or our own activity, it is fundamentally located in our intellect and in our will. So the principle or cause of the movement for rational souls, which we all have, we are rational souls, is internal and it's not external. So this is so for an animal, a non-rational animal, because they're animals and we're also animals, because we have motion and movement. The principle of action is through them, but really it's the things around them. It's their nature that's moving them. But they can't actually decide whether to follow through with something or not. Whereas we, on the other hand, have self-determination, and if this language makes you feel uncomfortable, thinking, well, only God is truly sovereign and don't be alarmed by the language. The Reformed tradition used this language. We're not meaning to say that we are not under ultimately God's authority and under divine sovereignty. That's not what we're saying. There are some people in the Christian tradition who would, like Pelagians and whatnot, who would have that understanding of self-determination. That's not the way I'm using it. That's not the way the Reformed use it. But self-determination is those things that are up to us. And namely, we're talking about choice. So, for example, Mitchell, did you choose to reach for that water? Yes. You chose. Now, your intention to reach for that water lay with you. It was in your power. You had the ability to choose no. You could have said, scrap this. I think this is a silly, presentation. I'm going to go sit down. You could have decided that, but you didn't. So the intention itself was in your power. And we have to understand this even in terms of other aspects of our life, because when it comes to sin, this is a different application of this idea. Sin is not merely the actual doing of your intentions, right? So if you desire to look at porn, and you are hunting and you're trying, and just like it's not working. You've got these blocks set up that's stopping you from watching it. You're getting really frustrated. Da, da, da. You can't think, oh, praise God. These things prevented me from sinning. No, you were sinning because you had the intention or the will to do that, and you could apply it to all kinds of things. So you actually sin by virtue of the intention of your heart to go after that. So whether you actually do it in the end or not, of course, there's a greater degree of sin in the fact of you actually come to doing it, but the sin still resides within our intention, within our assenting to that particular plan of action. So we are able to then inquire about what to do, and we're able to judge whether we should do it. So I can be presented with a scenario, and I can weigh it, I can think about it, and I can ultimately choose what to do. And that is what we're talking about in terms of self-determination. If you want to think about it in terms of our confession, it doesn't use the word self-determination, it uses the word free will, or actually does it use the word free will? Free choice. It's the fundamentally same idea. So God has endued the will of man with that natural liberty and power of acting upon choice, that it is neither forced nor by any necessity of nature determined to do good or evil. That's in chapter 9, paragraph 1, not 11. And this is fundamentally not destroyed with the fall. In paragraph 3, what is destroyed is our ability to will spiritual good. We can't choose to do things that are spiritually good because the unbeliever doesn't act by faith. And therefore they cannot will anything that is pleasing to God and fundamentally good. However, the unbeliever can, out of their own self-determination, will civic good, will common good. Things like, I don't want that person to get run over by a car, so I'm going to go help them. That ultimately is a common good, but it's not a spiritual good because it's not done from faith, and all things that are pleasing to God comes from faith, being in Christ. So what does this... This is all going to tie in. If you recall that initial quote that I gave from that Nazi, talking about responsibility, talking about what depends on him. Oh, he was given orders. He was under authority. This is all going to tie into how we understand being in authority and being under authority. When we understand what depends on us and what does not. In what sense are we voluntary, and in what sense are we not voluntary when we act? So let me give you an example. Who should I pick on? Let's get Caleb. Why don't you come over here? And then can I get 4 men to come here, please? Four men. Come here. No, 4 men. Caleb, sit down over there. 4 men. So I'll be the 4th. Or actually, we'll get others to do it. It's more fun. Okay, come here. We need 1 more man. Is there no more men? Where are the men? Okay. Oh, there. Okay. Okay, here we go. Here. So Caleb, what's your favorite color? Whenever you guys are, that's fine. Yeah. Green? Yeah, go for it. Yeah. Okay. Lift. Okay. Excellent. Did you will to go up there? Okay, go down. We don't want to break this chair. Okay, you can go back to your seats. So, did you choose to do that? Okay, so then technically that was voluntary. But let's pretend that they hold you away. They hold you away to a far off land. They put, some rings in your nose and dragged you there. That's involuntary. Because the involuntary consists in either compulsion or force or ignorance. And we're not going to talk about ignorance today, we're going to talk about it next week. But compulsion and force. So in a sense, he was being forced, something that didn't happen according to his will. He didn't choose that. It happened to him. He was passive. So he wasn't acting voluntarily because voluntary actions happen according to desire and knowledge. What we desire and what we knowledge. So we can speak, in a sense, about animals being voluntary because they're moved by a sense of desire. Now, they don't have knowledge, but in a sense they do have a kind of knowledge of the thing, But so they're moved voluntarily. But now if you push you electrocute the animal, that would be going against their will. That would be preventing them from achieving what they desire. And involuntary is when the movement, the motion, is from some external violent force that prevents them from acting. So this has been a lot of philosophy. I'm not going to quote William Ames, who is a Puritan on this, just to give you an example, because we're running short on time. But here's the fundamental question. If you've been following along, if you've been tracking with me, if choice, if self-assent, right, assenting to something or withholding assent to something, if self-determination, those things that happen fundamentally in our intellect, in our reason, those things are located in the soul, then how do we exercise authority over others? Because that seems to be off limits. What it means to say it's not in the sphere of your authority. It's not in the sphere of your control. In fact, it's in the sphere of the person. So in terms of Mitchell, what was in the sphere of his control was his choice. But whether the action actually happened was not ultimately in his choice. Ultimately, God's sovereign. You can choose to do something, but according to divine providence, God will prevent you from doing it. Right? That ultimately is not in your control whether something will come to pass. Ultimately, it is God. And so how then do we exercise authority over others when we can't compel their will, when we can't compel their assent, their agreement? And if authority, once again, is the directing of others towards the good, well, what if they don't think that's the good? What if they don't agree? What if your children don't agree? What if your employees don't agree? What if your congregant doesn't agree? So how do we exercise authority in this case?
Persuasion?
Persuasion, okay. And explain why.
Well, if we, by exercising authority, we mean like, sort of, we want them to convince their own, to exercise their own will and authority over themselves to do the good.
Uh-huh.
To like convince them.
Mm-hmm.
Would that also mean that if you force someone to do something that's not a true exercise of authority, like, like I don't know, you take Mitchell's arm and you make him grab the wood with it.
Well, in a technical sense, it was the use of authority. Now, it was not the use of exercise of authority very well, because I wasn't directing him towards any particular good. But yes, Darsh.
I was going to say leading by example because we carry the cross because Christ carried the cross. So we follow his authority because he's already done that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So Dom, what you're saying is important, and Darsh, that's a good example. So how then? So if persuasion, to go back to Dom, is fundamentally, we'll pick up with you in a second. If persuasion is the primary way, that requires the use of reason. It requires the use of thinking and of communicating what is good to the other. So you can see immediately the implications of this when it comes to a relationship, for example, in marriage. You could use force, but where's that going to leave you? Right? Can you use force? I mean, is that going to produce a good outcome? Is that ultimately going to achieve the good? Now, on the other hand, there is obviously legitimate instances where force is definitely required, right? The husband is abusing the child, right? Is doing something like that. Then the use of force is necessary. Removing the kids and leaving, that would be an example of force. That goes against the will of the husband. But persuasion is key in terms of persuading others to assent to the same thing as the one in authority understands it. And so what this immediately does is it puts a lot of pressure on you, if you're an authority, to be thinking rightly. If we're ultimately aiming towards the good, then you have to know what the good is. And you can't be misled about what the good is. Because if you're misled about what the good is, then you're leading to people what is evil. The opposite of good is bad or evil. So you have to be clear in your thinking. You have to be clear in your thinking. And there's all kinds of implications that we'll talk about this even over the next 2 weeks. But in terms of being exercising authority well, in terms of thinking well, in terms of understanding how we communicate that well to others, is absolutely crucial. But the fundamental point that I want to make to you is that depending on the subject, it's going to affect the way that we use authority. So those who have rational creatures, rational humans that are fully rational, full use of reason, they have they're an adult, right? Your spouse, your colleague, your boss. The use of authority is primarily through persuasion. I mean, if your boss has to use force, then you're probably fired. Now, with those who are non-rational, like animals, or sub-rational, or those who, for example, are emerging into reason, as I would argue that children are, who are growing in reason, the primary mode is through compulsion or force. And this is on a scale. It's not like this and that and this. It's a complete scale. As a child grows, there's a reason why you don't spank your 25-year-old when they make a foolish decision. Right? It's the reason why some of you in this room are not being spanked for making really stupid decisions. It's because the assumption is you have reason, and you can be persuaded to see that you're wrong and that you should act otherwise. And then, of course, there's natural consequences. But with children, and we're not going to talk about this today much, but children have a hard time knowing what is their own good. So that's what I'll leave you with, is a very young child like Lucian doesn't realize by crawling to the edge of the chair and falling down, he'll smack his face. He's oblivious to it. He doesn't know. He has no conception of even falling like that. That's not a thing that he understands. So we can't move him towards the good in the same way you could to an adult, to say, oh, step back from that cliff. If you're going cliff jumping, step back, you're too close, right? Or if you're not going cliff jumping, but you're looking at some canyons or cliffs, that's an unreasonable distance, an unreasonably close distance to the edge. So the one in authority must counsel and discover. They must take counsel. They must think about it. They must deliberate about what to do. And then they must judge what they have discovered, make a judgment about what course of action, and then they must apply that judgment to action. So they must actually act, and by that it's either commanding or instructing others about what one has counseled about and judged. And I want to talk about the practicality of this in terms of marriage. Ultimately, if you're married or if you're in authority, I think we can all agree that we fail woefully at often directing others towards the good. Usually, the good is our own good, and that's a big mistake. That's abuse of authority. And so we'll talk about abuse of authority and how we can corrupt authority by our own desires, by operating on the basis of what's best for us, selfishly. So we'll talk about that next week. So is there any questions? What time is it? Go ahead.
A government which hypothetically never communicates to you in any way whatsoever,
Okay, a government which hypothetically never communicates to you. Let's say you're in a hypothetical illusion. You're in a simulation where you're on an abandoned island, and for whatever reason, you're just simply being monitored. You do not know anything about this. There is a government that is doing this over you. Is that government in any sense authority over you, since they neither compel nor persuade you?
Well, they do compel you, because they're acting, to go back to the description of voluntary versus involuntary, fundamentally, you're being, and the involuntary actions consist in either compulsion or force or ignorance, which we'll talk about next week. So you're in ignorance, so in that sense, yes. but they are exercising authority in a corrupt fashion. They are being a tyrant.
Okay, and according to Romans 13, verse 2, which you quoted at the beginning of the presentation, are they a worker of righteousness for your good in that sense?
No, they would be abusing.
So therefore,
power.
Romans 13 is prescriptive, not descriptive.
Prescribing what they ought to do.
Yes.
Yes.
Instead of just simply being a blanket description of all authority ever.
I would say they're prescriptive.
Yeah, okay, cool. And then second question, how do we account for animals, including with the best MRI technology and looking at their brain scans while they're doing this, seemingly attempting suicide? Pigs and dolphins especially have been recorded with no special brain signatures, no special hormonal imbalances whatsoever, attempting suicide. How do we account for that on an account of a animal tending to the good?
Tending to the good.
Yes.
Well, like all things in reality, especially affected by the fall, as was laid out so wonderfully by Sam, things are corrupted. So there are animals that do things that are self-harming, but that's on account of some kind of corruption in their in the nature, not on account of some explanation that animals don't will their own good. Like if you get a chipmunk and you put some poison or things in its brain, it naturally eats nuts, but you could tinker with it to the point where then it tries to eat toothpaste. Right? I don't know. You can but the thing is that those are not in a those are in a vacuum. Those are special circumstances, and the circumstances themselves explain why the animal is doing that. It's called, to use technical language, it's called a privation of the nature. So where the thing is not tending towards what it naturally should, which is its own life. And that's the same thing with humans. No natural person desires their own death. They only desire death because it seems, because fundamentally it's a corruption of the perception of what is good. Yeah.
Is the idea of locomotive, how it's used now in terms of like cars and stuff, is that because of the Enlightenment that was changed and to like a more mainstream meaning for like a locomotive as in terms of vehicles?
The term locomotive is just a modern philosophical term to describe what the scholastics used.
Oh, okay.
So it's not the term itself, locomotive, as far as I'm aware, is not in the original Latin. Yeah. Well, I mean, the terms are like they come back to Latin words. Like modus is Latin for to move. Any other questions? So there's tons of implications of this in terms of being in a church, being a part of a church in terms of being under authority of someone in a church, in terms of having authority over children or your family or in the places of power that you've been placed, and being under authority. When we recognize that when we're under authority, fundamentally we cannot be compelled in our choices or our assent. We must assent to an action before we do it, otherwise it's involuntary. And this, we'll talk about next week, is that this affects our moral responsibility. Because there is genuine moral responsibility for being in authority, if you are in authority, and we'll talk about that next week. Any last questions? No? Okay. Well, if any other questions come up, you can come chat with me later. Let's close in prayer. Heavenly Father, these are difficult concepts to grasp, no doubt, and new concepts. But we want to, just like we desire, O Lord, to worship you well and have good doxology. And good doxology comes from good theology, having a deeper understanding of your nature and who you are and how you relate to us. So, Lord, a better understanding of these things affects our orthopraxy, the way we live our lives. And so, God, I pray that you would help this in the lives as we think through how we act and how we move, and as it relates to our authority over ourselves and our authority over others, that we would be wise, that we would be shrewd, that we would recognize that there is a great weight that is upon us, that for those things that we are responsible for, we truly are responsible for. Those things that are under our authority are truly under our authority. And Lord, may we see also, God, that you are sovereign, that all things, even our own willing, only in the movements of our own intellect, fall under your authority and under your domain. And so we praise you, O Lord, that you have given us these faculties of the mind, and that we in fact can do these things, live our lives and give glory to you willingly. We pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.